Hello and welcome to From the South, teleSur's daily news program. We start off in news from Latin America. Venezuela's National Electoral Council has announced the roadmap for the recall referendum against President Nicolas Maduro. According to Electoral Council President Tibisay Lucena, the next step is for Venezuela's opposition to collect signatures from 20% of voters. The 3-day window to collect these 4 million signatures will likely be in October. Once these signatures are validated, the recall date will be set. The vote will likely take place in early 2017. We now go to our correspondent in Caracas, Cody Weddle, who was at Venezuela's National Electoral Council this afternoon for the announcement.
Today, the president of Venezuela's Electoral Commission laid out what she called an exposition to the country, explaining the timeline and how the recall referendum process solicited by the opposition Mood Coalition will be carried out here in Venezuela. There's several important dates to point out to you here: September 16th or 17th. That's when the date will be announced for the next stage in this process, which will be the collection of signatures of 20% of the electorate here, which would be carried out towards the end of October if the opposition complies with all the rules and regulations governing this process. If they continue and collect 20% of the signatures, then towards the end of November would be when the date would be set for the recall referendum. Reporting in Caracas, I'm Cody Weddle, teleSur.
Senators in Brazil gathered in a plenary session on Tuesday to vote on whether suspended President Dilma Rousseff should stand trial after the impeachment committee in the upper house approved the motion last week. The decision of Tuesday's vote could lead proceedings into a final trial in which the 81 senators must reach a verdict at the end of August or the first days of September. Ecuador's capital, Quito, was without electricity for a few hours after an earthquake measuring 4.6 on the Richter scale hit shortly after 11 p.m. local time on Monday. The quake shook at a depth of approximately 4.3 miles, with the epicenter just east of Quito. Ecuador's Geophysical Institute said the quake was not an aftershock of the April 16th 7.8 magnitude earthquake that left over 650 dead. Members of Colombia's FARC guerrillas will visit 23 rural areas and 8 special camps to inspect where they will live after peace talks with the government are completed. The FARC members were joined by government officials and Norwegian arbitrators in a press conference ahead of the visit to the areas. President Juan Manuel Santos said that these locations will be available for the group after they have demobilized and after their weapons have been given up. And 40 forest fires are currently ravaging through Bolivia's northern and central departments, affecting some 8,000 kilometers of land. The fires are said to have been the worst in a decade. The government's Ministry of Environment and Water has organized flights to assess damage and target focal points. Indian activist Idam Sharmila has ended her 16-year hunger strike, considered to be the longest in the world. Sharmila was protesting the brutality by India's military in the country's northeastern state of Manipur. However, after 16 years, the activist has now decided to run for office, with her sole issue focused on removing the law that allows the military to act with impunity. The leaders of Russia and Turkey have agreed to cement ties, pledging to restore close economic relations. Russian President Vladimir Putin said sanctions on Turkey would be phased out. A deep diplomatic crisis occurred in November 2015 after Turkey shot down a Russian fighter jet. Syrian government forces and their allies have recaptured territory from rebels in southwestern Aleppo. The government sent thousands of reinforcements to mount a counterattack in the city after rebels broke through government lines 2 days earlier. A Saudi-led military coalition carried out airstrikes on Yemen's capital Sana'a for the first time in 5 months. At least 20 civilians were killed in the deadly attack. This has escalated the conflict after UN peace talks broke down over the weekend.
Hamas's Change and Reform bloc in the Palestinian Legislative Council discussed the dangers and repercussions of normalizing relations with the Israeli occupation during a meeting Tuesday morning. Several Palestinian officials from Gaza attended the meeting, including Interior Minister Fathi Hamad, as well as Arab lawmakers and legal professors who participated through video conference. Faraj al-Ghul, secretary of the Hamas Change and Reform Parliamentary Bloc, rejected all forms of normalizing ties with Israel and urged the Arab and Muslim countries to publicly cut their diplomatic relations with the occupation state.
Normalizing ties with Israel is against legitimacy and law. It also contradicts with the Arab League's previous resolutions and agreements. We urge Arab and Muslim leaders to cut diplomatic relations with Israel, to expel the Israeli ambassadors and consul from their country, and not to cooperate with the occupation by any means until our lands are free. We must fight the occupation, not to normalize ties.
Israel announced on Monday its intention to form an interministerial force aiming to deport, boycott, divestment and sanctions activists in the Palestinian territories. BDS is a global Palestinian-led movement founded in 2005 aiming to increase political and economic pressure on Israel to restore Palestinian rights through boycotting Israeli products and culture institutions. Unlike Arab leaders, the late Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez cut diplomatic relations with Israel and expelled its ambassador after its deadly war on Gaza in 2008-2009. The action was most welcomed by Palestinians. Nuharazin Telesu TV, Gaza.
Nosotros toda la vida hemos estado al lado del pueblo palestino.
And now on to news from the Olympics. Rafaela Silva won the first gold medal for Brazil in the Rio 2016 Olympic Games. Silva competed in the women's 57-kilo judo, where she defeated world champion Sumia Dorshurin of Mongolia. Silva qualified for the London Olympic Games in 2012, but was disqualified for a rule violation in the early rounds. And that's it for From the South. More on these and other stories on our website, telesurtv.net/English.